The flag on the porch was tattered, its stars bleeding into the stripes, as if it, too, had fought its own war. Daniel hesitated, his hand trembling on the doorknob, knowing the house no longer sang his name. Inside, Clara knelt by the hearth, poking at embers that refused to catch. Her eyes met his, brief, sharp, like a blade slipping through ribs. With the paint peeled like curled petals, and the flag hung half-heartedly in the late wind. Daniel stepped off, boots hitting dust with a weight that wasn't just his own. 6 years gone. 6 years of border patrol, dirt air, ration water, and nights so quiet you could hear yourself aging. But here, in the small town of Brantford, Virginia, maple trees arched over the sidewalk like elders bending forward to whisper. Mailboxes stood in crooked rows, some dented, some proud. A ceramic duck still stood in front of the Wilsons' lawn. The only thing new was the quiet buzzing in his head, like something unfinished had been left behind. Not at the border, but here. Daniel passed the old gas station, now boarded up, and the playground where he once pushed a younger version of himself on the swing. Before deployments, before Clara was born, before nights grew long and memory stretched thin. The swing creaked once in the wind, as if it recognized him. When the house came into view, he stopped. It looked smaller than he remembered. Shrunk, not by time, but by absence. Long enough for a breeze to tug gently at the cuff of his sleeve. Long enough for him to wonder if going forward meant he would undo something sacred. If silence was safer than knocking. He placed his duffel bag down next to the gate. The latch was rusty, the kind that didn't just squeak. It resisted, as though warning him, people don't always stay where you left them. He pushed through anyway. Each step toward the porch felt like walking into a photograph. Same white railings, same flower pot. Now empty, by the steps. Same screen door with the small tear in the corner. But something in the air told him the house did not remember him. It tolerated him. There was a noise from inside. Not laughter, not music, just the clatter of something plastic falling, followed by footsteps and a woman's voice. Not a greeting, not Daniel, just an order. He didn't move. He didn't knock. He stood with one foot on the porch, hand resting on the old post, head slightly tilted like someone listening for a language he once knew but had forgotten how to speak. Behind him, colder this time, Daniel looked down at his boots. Dusty, worn. They had walked more ground than they should have. Yet somehow this porch, this old house, made him feel further from home than the outposts ever did. He exhaled through his nose, quiet. Still there, but not yet back. Then, through the screen door, he heard the sound of a child breathing. That fragile rhythm only a parent knows. His hand twitched toward the doorknob, but he stopped. Not yet. He didn't knock. Something in his body told him not to. Bare feet kissed the wood of the porch, careful, trained. Not the way a child should move in her own home, but the way someone learns to walk when they're always in trouble for being seen. She carried a plastic bag knotted at the top. It sagged with weight, pulling her shoulder down slightly. Her other arm clutched a thin, rolled-up blanket and an old stuffed bear, brown fur worn to gray, one eye missing, stitched across the stomach with what looked like dental floss. The girl didn't cry. She just stood there. 9 years old, maybe younger. Her cheeks were smudged with something. Not dirt exactly, maybe chalk or ash. Her hair was tied up in a loose ponytail that had started to fall apart. And her eyes, God, her eyes looked right through him. Not recognition, not surprise, but that quiet kind of endurance children develop too early when the people who were supposed to protect them forget how. Behind her, a woman's voice cut sharply from deeper in the house. Don't come back in until you're done. And wipe that look off your face. Then the sound of something slamming. Not the door. A drawer? A cupboard? The girl didn't flinch. She took one slow step forward and placed the plastic bag at the edge of the porch. Then she sat down next to it, knees hugged close, blanket across her lap. She looked out, not at Daniel, but past him, like the street held more safety than the walls behind her. He wanted to speak, wanted to say her name, but he wasn't sure yet if it was really her. Couldn't let himself hope too quickly. Couldn't make it worse if he was wrong. So he sat, on the edge of the porch, 2 feet away, silent. She didn't look at him. Daniel nodded, barely, then guided Clara forward. She didn't let go of his hand. Not until they reached the worn rug in the middle of the room. There, she sat again, cross-legged, still silent, listening to the weight of the room, the clock ticking somewhere in the hallway, the car driving past outside. Clara's lips moved. Not sound, just breath forming words she didn't say. Daniel didn't press. This wasn't the time for questions. This was the time for staying. For proving something not with words, but with stillness. He looked up once at Marie, who was already retreating into the kitchen. Her voice came after a beat, echoing like something thrown over the shoulder. There's soup in the fridge if you want it. Or whatever's left. Clara didn't react. Daniel didn't either. He just whispered into the air, more to himself than anyone else. We'll be fine. No one answered. But the house didn't push him out. And Clara hadn't let go. Daniel stood for a long time in the hallway. Not because he didn't know where to go, but because everything felt unfamiliar in ways that had nothing to do with furniture or paint. The layout hadn't changed. The rug was the same one they bought on a rainy Sunday afternoon, back when they still believed in decorating. The ceiling fan still wobbled slightly when turned on high. And yet, everything seemed different, as if the house had shifted while he was gone, like a boat that had drifted from its anchor ever so slightly, but far enough that the dock no longer lined up. Clara had wandered toward the window, her bear trailing like a shadow behind her. She stood on tiptoe and pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek outside. Her small fingers held the fabric with a kind of practiced carefulness, like someone who had once been told not to leave fingerprints on the glass. Daniel watched her, then turned his gaze to the walls. No photos. The family frames were gone. In their place, a cheap canvas print of a beach sunset and a quote in cursive. Choose joy. He didn't remember anyone in this house ever saying that phrase. Certainly not Marie. He stepped into the living room, careful not to let his boots scrape the floor too loudly. The couch sagged slightly on one end, and on the coffee table, a stack of unread magazines curled at the edges. One of Clara's notebooks was pushed half under the sofa, the cover bent. The corners chewed, probably by nerves, or boredom, or something worse. Marie returned from the kitchen with a wine glass. Not full, not empty. She leaned in the doorway, like she didn't know imposture. Didn't expect you today, she said, voice flat. Daniel said nothing. He was too busy seeing things she didn't know how to hide. The trash can by the sink was overfilled. Empty microwave trays. Crumpled napkins. A child's plastic cup resting precariously on top, half filled with something orange and flat. Near the sink, a line of dishes waited without urgency. As if time had settled on them, too. Still standing there like a guest, Marie muttered, "You're not going to explode if you sit down, you know." Daniel blinked once, slow. He stepped toward the recliner, his old seat. It was still there, still angled toward the TV, though now surrounded by clutter, a pile of old mail, a hair straightener, a phone charger snaking across the armrest. He didn't sit there. He took the far end of the couch instead. Marie watched him for a beat, then shrugged and dropped into the recliner herself. Canned and weightless. Daniel looked toward Clara again. She had drawn shapes on the fog of the window with her finger. A tree, a sun, a stick figure holding something unrecognizable. Then she wiped it all away with the sleeve of her shirt and let the curtain fall back into place. "So," Marie finally said, "you're back." He nodded once. She smirked. "Just like that." "No," he said quietly, "not just like that." She rolled her eyes, sipped her wine. "Figures. You think you can drop in and everything picks up where it left off?" "I don't think that," he said, still watching Clara. There was a pause, a long one, the kind that used to mean they were about to talk about something real. But now it just hovered, waiting for someone to be brave enough to break it. Neither of them were. Marie leaned her head back. "The spare room's still got junk in it. If you're staying, you'll need to clear it yourself." Daniel nodded. "Fine. You planning to stay long?" "I don't know yet." Clara turned in, looking toward them both. Her eyes skipped over her mother and landed on Daniel. He smiled softly. Not much, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. Enough to remind her that someone was still here, still watching, still willing to show up. She didn't smile back, but she didn't look away either. That was something. Marie shifted in her seat, suddenly uncomfortable. She reached for the remote, turned the volume up 2 notches, enough to fill the space with meaningless sound. Daniel leaned back against the cushion, not quite relaxing. His body still sat like it was on duty. And perhaps it was. Some rooms never stop being battlefields. Some doors never open all the way. But in that moment, even though the air was heavy and the silence said too much, Clara remained. And that, he told himself, was the first door worth knocking on. Evening came with a kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, just empty. Outside, the streetlights buzzed into life, casting yellow cones over the cracked pavement. Inside, the house exhaled in creaks and sighs, as if unsure how to welcome a man who once belonged, and now only returned as a reminder. Daniel stood in the hallway, staring at the door to the spare room. Mali hadn't liet. There was junk. Boxes, old clothes, a broken vacuum, a suitcase that wasn't his. It smelled faintly of mildew and something powdered, maybe spilled detergent, maybe forgotten makeup. He didn't bother switching on the light, just stood at the threshold and let the shadows show him what kind of space he was being given. Behind him, Clara moved like a ghost down the hallway, sockless feet brushing the wood. She didn't go to him, didn't ask anything, just passed by carrying a mug that looked too heavy for her hand. He followed her without meaning to. In the kitchen, she climbed onto a chair without a sound. Reaching up, she opened a cabinet and took down a packet of instant oatmeal. She didn't ask for help, didn't check if it was okay. She filled a mug with water, opened the microwave, and stood on tiptoe to press the buttons. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching. The hum of the microwave filled the room, too loud for what it was. Clara leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Her bear sat on the table nearby, slightly damp from the morning's rain. Its stitched belly was coming undone again. Marie walked in behind him, scrolling through her phone. Her voice was distracted. She eats that most nights. Won't touch real food lately. Daniel looked at the packet in the girl's hand. Apple cinnamon. He remembered her loving that flavor when she was 5. He remembered stirring it for her while she bounced in her chair, legs too short to reach the floor. She likes it, he said simply. Marie shrugged. Doesn't mean it's good for her. Clara didn't say anything. She took the oatmeal from the microwave, too hot, and flinched only slightly. She didn't cry out. She didn't ask for help. She placed the mug on the table and stirred slowly with a spoon that was a little too big for the cup. Marie leaned against the fridge. You want coffee? He shook his head. She poured herself some anyway. No offer for him. Just filled her cup and took a sip like she needed something to do with her hands. I'm working night shifts now, she said. Bartending. He nodded. I sleep in the morning. Tommy helps watch Clara sometimes. He's rough around the edges, but he means well. Daniel didn't answer. Marie looked at him, trying to read his silence. You think I'm doing a bad job, she said. I didn't say that. You don't have to. She left the room after that, taking her coffee with her, steps fading down the hallway like a conversation cut off without warning. Daniel pulled a chair beside Clara, slow enough not to startle her. She glanced at him but didn't stop stirring. He noticed her elbow had a bruise. Old, yellowing. Not fresh. Just unspoken. She set the spoon down carefully. I ate lunch today, she said, as if offering a report. Tommy made me a sandwich. I only dropped it once. He didn't know how to answer that. So he said what felt truest. You shouldn't have to try that hard. She looked at him again, longer this time. Then her fingers reached for the bear on the table. She placed it in her lap, gently, adjusting the ears like a ritual. I named him Vincent, she said quietly. That's a good name, he replied. He used to have a music box inside, but it broke. She took another spoonful of oatmeal, blowing on it slowly. I tried fixing it, she continued, but I couldn't make it sing again. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. He understood that, more than she would ever know. The next morning came gray, cloud-thick and heavy. The kind of sky that made even the birds forget to sing. Daniel woke early. Habit, mostly. Years of sleeping in tents, barracks, on cold ground or too thin mattresses made it impossible to stay in bed past dawn. But today, he hadn't really slept. The cot he'd cleared in the spare room groaned under every shift. The spring pressing into his shoulder blade like a finger reminding him he didn't belong. He stepped out quietly, careful not to wake Clara, and walked the hallway with his hand brushing the wall, counting cracks in the paint the way a man counts scars. In the living room, the curtain was drawn just enough to let in a dull light. His eyes fell on the shelf by the corner. Not high, just enough to be out of Clara's reach. There was a small plastic box, the kind that once held cookies or tacks. It was covered in faded cartoon stickers, edges peeling. Daniel pulled it down carefully and opened the lid. Inside, stubby colored pencils, most broken in half, tips snapped, some chewed at the ends. No sharpene, no irase, just fragments of color. Beneath them, folded paper. He lifted one. A child's drawing. 3 stick figures. A tall one in a hat. A small one with curly hair. A third figure floating between them like a question mark. All holding hands under a blue sun. Another picture. A house. Red-roofed, crooked chimney. A swing set. Another. a girl on a porch alone, beside a suitcase. Each drawing was quiet, uneven, smudged. He stared for a long time, not at the art, at the wear, the creases, the fingerprints. He set the drawings aside. Underneath, tucked into the corner, was a blue ink pen with no cap. Dry. It had leaked, leaving a stain on the bottom of the box like something that had tried to say too much and been left too long. Daniel put the box back, slowly, as if not to disturb the ghosts living inside it. From the hallway came the soft scrape of feet. Clara appeared in the doorway, hair unbrushed, holding her bear by one arm. She saw the box in his hand and didn't move. Her face didn't twist, didn't panic. She just stood there, waiting. "I wasn't going through your things," he said gently. She blinked. "It's okay. I don't think they're mine anymore." He tilted his head. "What do you mean?" She looked down. "They used to be in my room. But one time I left them on the table, and Mom stepped on one and said I didn't know how to clean up after myself. So I put them there. Tommy told me to throw them out, but I just didn't." Daniel looked again at the box. They weren't art supplies. They were memory fragments. He knelt and handed it to her. Clara took it, but didn't open it. She cradled it with both arms and walked back toward her room without another word. That afternoon, Marie came home with grocery bags, mostly microwave meals and wine. She slammed the cupboard shut when the shelf was too full. Daniel stood at the sink, rinsing a single plate. She spoke without turning around. "She's still playing with those old markers?" "Pencils," he said. "She draws stuff all the time, but nothing real, just weird little things." "She's a child," Daniel said. Marie laughed dry. "So was I. Didn't get to float around drawing nonsense." He turned off the faucet. "She's not floating," he said, quiet. Marie turned, lips pressed into a line. "She needs structure. She needs someone to look at her." Marie threw a box of noodles onto the counter harder than necessary. "I've done the best I can." He didn't argue. He'd already seen what best had turned into. Later that evening, Daniel passed by Clara's room again. The door was half open. She sat at the edge of her bed, the box of pencils beside her, her legs swinging gently. She wasn't drawing, just looking out the window. He knocked gently. She turned, startled. "I was thinking," she said. "About what?" She looked down at the box. "About what to draw next. I want to draw something quiet, but I don't know how to draw something that doesn't make noise." Daniel smiled softly. "You already do," he said. She blinked. Every time. It was near dusk when Daniel found himself out on the porch again, nursing a mug of lukewarm coffee and the kind of silence that didn't ask to be filled. The day had folded in on itself gently. No arguments, no breaking points, just a kind of stretched thinness that made everything feel brittle. Clara had spent most of the afternoon in her room, hunched over a notebook with a blue crayon that barely left a mark. Marie had gone upstairs claiming a migraine, her door clicking shut with a finality Daniel didn't question. Out here, the air smelled faintly of pine needles and rain that hadn't come yet. He stared at the railing, where the paint had chipped enough to reveal the raw grain beneath. There were tiny notches in the wood, about a foot apart, maybe from years back, when he and Marie measured Clara's height on her birthdays. He reached out, touched one. It was faded, forgotten. Across the street, a screen door creaked. He looked up and met the eyes of a woman he hadn't seen in over 6 years. Mrs. Eileen. She stood in her doorway, arms folded across her thin frame. Gray cardigan buttoned at the neck, though it wasn't cold. Her white hair was pinned back, and her eyes, sharper than memory, held his gaze without blinking. Daniel offered a nod. She didn't smile, didn't wave. But after a moment, she stepped down from her porch and crossed the street slowly, shoes quiet against the sidewalk. She didn't walk like someone trying to chat. She walked like someone with something to say that had waited too long already. When she reached the bottom of his steps, she looked up at him, not kindly, not coldly, just honestly. "I saw her," she said. Daniel didn't pretend not to understand. "I know," he said. Mrs. Eileen nodded once. "She's always quiet. Too quiet. Kids don't get that way on their own." Daniel stepped aside. A silent invitation. She climbed the 3 steps with care and took the edge of the bench beside him. Her hands were wrinkled, knuckles swollen with time. "I wanted to knock," she said after a while. "So many times. Why didn't you?" She shrugged. "I'm old, Daniel. People don't want old women telling them how to raise their children. And I wasn't sure what I was seeing. Not exactly." Daniel waited. "I'd hear her sweeping the porch at night," she continued. "Midnight, sometimes later. Little feet. Soft scraping. I saw her once, on the side of the house, with a flashlight, cleaning the windows. He swallowed, slowly. Why? I asked her, Eileen said. She told me. Mom says if I want to live here, I have to earn it. Daniel's jaw clenched. Just enough for her to notice. She didn't say it like she was angry, Eileen whispered. She said it like she believed it. They sat in silence for a long time. A car passed in the distance, tires humming low over the asphalt. Somewhere a dog barked once, then stopped. I thought about calling someone, Eileen said. But there's a line, you know, between what's your place and what isn't. And people get good at hiding the worst parts. She didn't have bruises. Not ones you could see. Daniel nodded. Is she all right? Eileen asked, softer now. She's here, he said. I think that's the first step. Eileen looked down at her hands, then out across the street to her own home. I used to watch you push her in the stroller. Back when she was just a jelly bean in pink shoes. Daniel let out a quiet breath. Feels like someone else's life. Feels like a life paused, Eileen said. And no one hit play again. They sat until the porch light flickered on above them. Automatic, on a timer Daniel hadn't reset. Eileen stood. If she ever needs something, a place to sit. When he turned to go back inside, Clara was there. Just inside the screen door, her eyes wide but not surprised. She hadn't interrupted. She hadn't spoken. Just listened. He opened the door. She stepped aside for him. And when he walked in, she followed. Not like someone needing protection, but like someone who had quietly decided which adults in her life were worth following. The next morning, Daniel woke before the sun. Not from noise, but from that strange, kind of internal clock soldiers never quite shake. He lay in a narrow bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, watching the faint cracks cross like old riverbeds. The air in the spare room smelled like mothballs and cardboard. Still, it was quieter than anywhere he'd slept in months. When the light outside shifted from ink blue to silver gray, he got up. The kitchen tiles were cold under his bare feet, the refrigerator humming like a tired animal. He found eggs, bread that was nearly stale, and half a stick of butter folded in its paper like a secret. He didn't move fast, just steady, quiet, as if not to wake the memory of something. He scrambled the eggs gently, toast in the pan, butter softening just enough to coat. No spices, just food that stayed warm a little longer than it should. He didn't cook often, but this felt familiar, like how you remember tying a necktie after years, not because of muscle memory, but because someone once showed you how and cared enough to watch you get it right. Clara appeared at the kitchen doorway, still in her nightshirt, holding Vincent by one leg. Her hair was messy, one sleeve of her shirt sliding down her shoulder. She didn't speak. Daniel didn't look over right away. He just pointed gently to the table. There's breakfast, he said. She walked to the table with soft, deliberate steps and sat across from where he stood. He placed a plate in front of her and a glass of water beside it. She stared at it for a moment, as if unsure whether it was real. Do you want ketchup? He asked. She shook her head. Then, almost ceremoniously, she picked up the fork and took a bite. She chewed slowly. The eggs must have been a little rubbery, but she didn't say a word. Daniel sat down across from her. His plate identical. They ate in silence, the way people do who are just learning how to sit in the same room again. Midway through the meal, Clara looked up and said, You cook. Sometimes. Daniel dried the dishes while she rinsed, and when she finished, she turned off the faucet without splashing. It wasn't efficient. It was reverent. Later that afternoon, while Marie was out, Daniel went to the store. He came back with 2 bags. Art paper, a small box of new color pencils, a packet of cookies, and a blue hoodie with a Stitch Bear on the sleeve. He didn't wrap any of it, just left it on the edge of the table. Clara found them after a bath. She didn't react. She picked up the box of pencils first, turned it in her hand, set it down carefully, then the hoodie. She held it to her chest, pressing her cheek against the fabric. Daniel didn't watch her long. He returned to the kitchen to finish wiping the counter. A few minutes later, she entered the room wearing the hoodie. It was a little loose on her, the sleeves too long, but she didn't pull them up. She let them hang like they belonged there. Thank you, she said. He turned. You're welcome. That evening, they sat on the back steps. The wind was light, the clouds low, the kind of air that hinted at rain but never delivered. Clara held her drawing pad on her knees, sketching quietly. Vincent was at her side. Daniel didn't ask what she was drawing. After a while, she showed him. It was a porch. 2 people sat on it. I didn't know what color your eyes were, so I just made them gray. That's close, he said. She smiled, just a little, then leaned her head on his shoulder. It lasted only a moment, but it stayed with him longer than most memories ever did. The light was strange that evening, orange but cold. the kind of light that makes everything look like it's holding its breath. Daniel stood at the edge of the driveway, garbage bags in one hand, the bin creaking open with a tired squeal. It should have been a simple moment, a mundane act, but everything felt weighted lately, like even routine had become symbolic. He dropped the bags in, closed the lid slowly, then paused before heading back inside. Across the street, Mrs. Eileen's porch light flickered on. She didn't come out, but he knew she was there, probably watching, not in judgment, but in quiet awareness. The way old women do when they've seen enough life to recognize the beginning of something ending. Inside, Claire was upstairs. He could hear the low hum of a cartoon playing from the tiny TV in her room, soft giggles woven into static. The sound of childhood trying to survive. Marie was in the kitchen, wine glass in one hand, phone in the other, laughing, just faintly, at something too far away to matter. He leaned against the doorway and watched her for a moment. She didn't notice. Her hair was freshly dyed again, an auburn too bright for the season. Her nails were chipped, wine-stained lips curled in half-interest at whatever message she was reading. He comes around sometimes. Helps with the yard. Claire's got a soft spot for him. Daniel didn't answer. She looked up, studied him. You think this is the time for an interrogation? No, he said. It's not. Another pause. You're back now, she said. You get to have an opinion again. I don't need one, he replied. That made her frown. He stepped into the kitchen, placed his keys gently on the counter. They slid a little, metal on laminate, and stopped just at the edge. I'm not angry, he said. Marie laughed under her breath. Shouldn't you be? No. Why not? He looked at her, really looked. Saw the woman who used to wait for his letters, who once painted the nursery yellow before they even knew if it would be a boy or girl. That woman was gone. Or maybe buried. Or maybe she never existed the way he thought. He didn't say any of that. He just shrugged. Because there's nothing I could ask you that I don't already know. Marie stared at him, something behind her eyes faltering for half a second. Then she looked down, placed her wine glass in the sink a little too hard, and turned toward the hallway. Claire's laughter floated down the stairs, soft and spontaneous. It pierced the silence like sunlight through stained glass. Marie froze. Daniel moved first. He went to the bottom step and sat down. Marie stood beside the doorway, her arms crossed like she didn't know what to do with them. I used to read to her, Daniel said quietly. Before bed, even when she was too young to understand the stories. Marie didn't reply. She liked the parts where people went on long journeys. Not the battles. The walking parts. The in-between parts. Sounds boring, Marie muttered. She didn't think so. More silence. Then she asked, barely audible. Do you think I'm a bad mother? Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at the stairs, the place where tiny hands had once learned to balance. Where birthday photos have been taken, where lost socks and plastic toys still turn up now and then. I think some questions don't matter anymore, he said finally. Marie nodded and walked away. Daniel remained on the step. He didn't go after her. Didn't rehearse arguments in his head or count regrets. He just sat. The house around him creaked in the settling air. And somewhere upstairs, Clara began humming. It wasn't a song he recognized, but it was soft, and it didn't sound lonely. That night, the house felt like it was listening. The walls didn't creak the way they used to. The air didn't shift with the weight of weather or memory. Even the refrigerator seemed to hum a little softer, as if it knew there was nothing left to cool but silence. Daniel lay in the spare bedroom, arms folded behind his head, staring up at the blank ceiling. The bed was narrow and firm, the sheets stiffer than comfort required. A single photograph stood on the dresser, Clara at maybe 5 years old, wearing wings made of cardboard, her arms out like she believed in something bigger than herself. He reached over, turned the photo down. Not to forget, just to rest. In the hallway, the low clink of a glass against porcelain. Mundane sounds, yet they scraped his chest open in ways he hadn't expected. He waited until the house quieted again before getting up. He crossed the hallway, barefoot on old wood. Their bedroom door was half shut. Light from the window spilled in across the carpet, casting shadows like dried riverbeds. Marie lay on the far side of the bed, turned away from the door. Her shoulders were still. No motion, not even the rustle of breath. He stood in the doorway longer than he should have, watching. Crickets sang in low, unhurried rhythms. Somewhere beyond the fence, a train called into the distance, its whistle long and aching. He sat. No coffee, no distraction. He looked up, watched the bulb die like a star giving up. He whispered something into the dark. Not a prayer, not a name, just sound to remind the night he was still there. When he went back inside, didn't pause by her door. He returned to the narrow bed, slid under the stiff sheets, closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, didn't dream. There was no battlefield in his sleep that night. No shouting, no running, no loss, just a soft, colorless quiet, like the pause between two lives. It wasn't a dramatic departure. And a single stuffed elephant that had somehow survived 5 Christmases and 1 house fire. Daniel loaded everything into the back of his old pickup just after noon. Marie didn't come outside. She didn't wave, didn't watch through the window. Inside, the television was on. A game show's applause leaked out through the screen door, sounding more like static than celebration. Clara climbed into the passenger seat, her feet barely reaching the floor mat. She held Vincent tight under one arm and rested her other hand on the edge of the window. Her face wasn't angry. The drive wasn't long, just 26 minutes, but it felt like something closing behind them with each mile. Trees gave way to open fields, old barns leaning into the wind like tired elders. Roads grew quieter, yards larger, mailboxes rusted. Daniel's mother, June, lived on a 2-acre plot just outside of town, the kind of house built by someone who planned to stay. Vinyl siding weathered gray, porch swing still intact, a red ceramic cardinal perched on the railing, watching like it always had. She opened the door before they reached the steps. Clara obeyed first. Daniel followed. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and something faintly floral. Not perfume, more like old linen that had been aired out in sunlight. Instead, she walked to the stove, stirred something in a small pot. Chicken and rice, maybe. The kind of food that didn't ask questions. Daniel took the seat by the window. The chair creaked beneath him. Outside, the backyard had gone wild with marigolds and dandelions. A pair of birds fought gently over space on the fence. A wind chime moved faintly, though no wind had come. The sound was soft, almost a memory. "You can take the guest room," June said, still stirring. "Sheets are fresh. Bathroom's got towels." The grief she'd kept in her chest since his first deployment, the quiet way she'd waited for this moment. Him, not just visiting, but needing her again. She didn't cry, didn't ask what happened, didn't ask why Clara came along, and Marie didn't. Daniel stood and opened the window a little wider. Warm air drifted in. Somewhere a dog barked 3 times. Then silence again. Later, he helped Clara unpack. Her room was smaller than the one at home, but the bed was soft, the closet held forgotten board games, and the window looked out onto a wide lawn. She pulled the green curtains aside and said, "It's brighter here." He didn't ask what she meant. She placed Vincent on the pillow and began arranging her colored pencils on the desk. When he reached for the bag of clothes, she stopped him. "I can do it." So he sat down on the edge of the bed and watched her fold T-shirts into perfect rectangles. Not because someone had taught her to, but because she'd learned that order meant safety. He looked at the walls, blank, waiting. Then at the corners of the room, where shadows used to linger but didn't anymore. This wasn't home. Not yet. But it wasn't a battlefield either. And that was a start. The morning light didn't ask anything of them. It spilled across the kitchen tiles, warming the floor before anyone stepped on it. June was already at the stove, flipping pancakes one by one with the focus of someone who found comfort in repetition. Clara sat at the table in her school sweatshirt, arms tucked into the sleeves, hair still damp from the shower. She wasn't speaking much lately, but she didn't seem sad, just watching. Every few minutes, her eyes flicked toward the window, as if trying to understand where she was now. Daniel stood at the sink, rinsing a plate that didn't need rinsing. His eyes kept drifting to the window, where the yard looked half alive and half forgotten. The grass had grown long in places. A shovel leaned against the shed like it hadn't moved in years. One of the rose bushes leaned toward the walkway, petals fading to the color of dried blood. "You should trim that corner near the rose bush," June said, not turning from the stove. Daniel nodded. "I'll get to it." He didn't rush. After Clara left for school, June driving. Because Clara still didn't like buses, Daniel stepped onto the porch with a mug of coffee that had cooled too fast. The boards underfoot groaned, a familiar sound. Across the field, a scarecrow leaned sideways like it had given up long ago. He watched a while, not because it moved, but because it didn't. And then he sat, not to think, not even to rest, but simply to be still in a world that, for the first time in years, wasn't asking him to run. He sat down with the lemonade, the kind that came from powder and old habit. Watching his father hammer in a fence post, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt, the lemonade warm by the time they drank it. Nothing remarkable happened that day, and maybe that's why he remembered it. Then he got up and fetched the hammer from the shed. The roof of the porch had started to sag, not dangerously, just enough to throw off the line of things. But fixing it felt like something he could do without thinking too hard. There weren't many things that felt that way lately. He worked all morning, not fast, not efficient, just steady. The nails squealed against old wood. The sun rose quiet and constant. A breeze nudged the wind chimes, but they didn't ring, just clinked once like a thought halfway formed. By noon, his shirt was clinging to him, and the sky had turned a white blue, the color of days that might promise rain but never deliver. June stepped out, holding a sweating glass of lemonade. "Thought you might need this," she said, her voice neutral as always, but with that undertone of care she never admitted aloud. He took it with a nod and leaned against the railing. "You always did like fixing things," she said. "Doesn't mean I'm good at it. That never stopped your father either." She didn't laugh, just smiled a little, tired and fond, and went back inside. He wasn't sure anymore. He'd learned the names of guns before birds. That used to make sense. Now it just made him tired. He drank the lemonade. Too sweet, but cold. He finished it anyway. Later, after a shower, he drove into town. The truck's engine stuttered once at the red light on 4th Street, but he didn't flinch. The kind of silence he carried now wasn't the startled kind. At the hardware store, he bought nails he didn't quite need, and a light bulb for the hallway Clara had said was too dark. He stood in front of the seed rack for a while, reading the names like poetry, blue salvia, heirloom tomato, coneflower. He didn't buy any, just like that someone somewhere still believed in seasons. The cashier, a boy with acne and earbuds, didn't ask any questions, just scanned and bagged and said, "Thanks, man," Daniel replied. "You too," though he wasn't sure what that meant in return. Back home, it was the backyard, but different, taller trees, thicker grass. The scarecrow she hadn't liked now had its head up, shoulders straight. On the porch, 2 small figures sat side by side, blurred but unmistakably together. "It's nice," Daniel said. Clara shrugged. "I don't like the swing." "Why not?" "It squeaks weird." He nodded. "We can oil it." She thought for a long second. Fireflies blinked early in the grass, though the sun hadn't fully gone. The air had the soft weight of coming summer. Clara asked, "Do I have to go back?" Daniel turned to her. "To school?" After she'd gone to bed, Daniel stood in the hallway, changing the bulb. It flickered once, then held. The light was softer than he expected, warmer. He didn't mind. He walked past Clara's room, glanced in. Vincent was on the pillow, arms spread. The green curtains lifted slightly with the breeze. He didn't step in, just stood there, one hand resting on the doorframe. Not to fix anything, not to hover, just to mark it down in memory. Some nights, no one cries. And that's enough. The next morning came like breath, quiet, slow, full of small grace. No birds, no wind, no hump in the road. Just light pouring through the window, like it had been waiting all night for permission to enter. Daniel stood by the stove, frying 2 eggs he didn't really want. The pan crackled gently. The sound as domestic as anything he'd known before the war. The coffee was dark, plain, and honest. He sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a newspaper he hadn't bought. His thumb stopped on the obituaries but didn't stay there long. Names meant something now. A half hour passed before Clara appeared, barefoot, her hair still soft from sleep. She didn't say good morning, just sat down across from him. He passed her a plate without comment, and for the first time in months, she ate everything. She didn't speak, just poured cereal. Sat down across from him. Her hair was tangled. She ate slow. Her eyes looked at the table more than at him. "Sleep okay?" he asked. She nodded. He didn't press. After breakfast, she went outside with her sketchbook. Daniel watched through the window for a while, her legs swinging off the porch edge, pencil moving in tight circles like she was tracing something only she could see. The wind lifted the ends of her sweatshirt. She didn't seem to notice. Somewhere behind her, the old swing creaked on its own, not with motion, but with memory. Later, while tidying her room, just to make sure the window was closed before the rain, this set might drizzle. He saw it, then pulled it away like the paper might burn him. The room smelled faintly of marker ink and laundry sheets. Vincent stared from the bed, one ear folded. A small blue sock lay forgotten near the closet. He left the envelope where it was. Back in the kitchen, he told himself he'd imagined it. Outside, Clara drew trees without leaves, birds without wings, shadows of places she might have known only in pieces, porches that sagged, windows that didn't open. That night, as the rain began, she asked if she could leave the window open. For the sound, she said. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. The rain tapped gently on the sill, a rhythm like a mother's hand. It smelled of road dust and lilacs. She fell asleep fast, one arm draped over Vincent, her sketchbook still open beside her. He lingered at the doorway. The letter was gone from the desk now, probably tucked away in her drawer or sketchbook. Maybe she'd throw it out. Maybe she'd keep it forever. Maybe one day she'd find it and not remember writing it all. Daniel went back downstairs, opened the back door, stood there in the frame, not stepping into the rain, just breathing in the smell of wet dirt and pine. The wind pressed against him like something with weight, and he closed his eyes for a moment, letting it. He remembered writing a letter once, back in his first year overseas, to Marie, before Clara, before so many things. He never sent it either. It's a strange thing, to write something that only exists because you hope someone might care enough to read it and then to fold it away, to hide it. Drew a map of a forest she said didn't exist, but she wished did. The river on the map was named Maybe. Daniel helped her with her backpack. She hugged him without being asked. That afternoon, when she came home from school, she placed a folded piece of paper on the table next to his coffee mug. Not the letter, just a note. I think I'm going to send it. But not yet. He read it twice, like it hadn't made up its mind yet. And maybe that was okay. Not every choice had to be rushed. Not every letter had to be mailed. Some things could sit for a while. Wait for the right wind. The days passed without headlines. No dramatic moments, no phone calls in the night, no visits from Marie. Just quiet shifts in weather and tone. One evening warmer than expected, a night where Clara didn't need the lamp. But because the house felt different before anyone else moved. The way a hospital room feels before dawn, clean and unsure. He made coffee, sometimes too strong, sat in the chair by the back door, listened to the wind through the pines. A dog barked 2 houses over. A crow landed on the shed and watched him without blinking. Across from him, on the kitchen table, some part of him kept glancing that way, just in case today was the day. Daniel stared at the brown paper bag on the seat like it had just spoken. He hadn't written a note inside. No smiley face. No little joke about her favorite fruit. Just her name, underlined once. But still, it felt like he'd forgotten something bigger than lunch. He turned the ignition and pulled out of the lot slower than usual. Rain traced lines down the windshield, catching the streetlights in streaks. He should have kept driving. The school wasn't far. He could drop it off at the front desk, wave it away like it was no big deal. But for some reason, he didn't. Instead, he parked near the ball field, empty now, muddy and gray, and sat there. The wipers made a dull thump every few seconds. Somewhere behind the school, the bell rang. Kids shifted rooms. Somewhere inside, Clara sat with an empty desk in front of her, maybe hungry, maybe not. Maybe waiting, maybe pretending not to care. He stayed until the clock hit noon, then drove home. The lunch sat on the counter for the rest of the day, untouched. That night, when Clara came through the door, damp hair tucked behind her ears, Daniel braced himself for disappointment. But she didn't say anything. She kicked off her shoes, hung her jacket, and somehow that felt worse. They had soup for dinner. The silence between them wasn't heavy, just ordinary. Like maybe she understood that some days people forget, or maybe she didn't expect anything anymore. Either way, she slurped her broth and kept her feet tucked beneath her chair. Later, she placed a new drawing on the fridge. It was of a woman standing in a garden. No face, no name, just hands open to the rain. Daniel looked at it long after she went to bed. He didn't know who it was meant to be, and maybe that didn't matter. In the quiet of the kitchen, he finally picked up the brown paper bag, opened it, and took out the sandwich. The bread was damp, the edges curled. He took a bite anyway. It didn't taste like much, but it reminded him of something, that even the smallest mistakes leave echoes. And sometimes the only thing left to do is listen. He stood by the counter, waiting for the toaster to reset. A quiet moment stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just hollow around the edges, like a house after guests have left. He didn't ask what the homework was. He didn't need to. The page was math, the kind with too many boxes and not enough logic. He let her work through it in her own way. The sky was the color of old metal. The driveway shined with leftover water. A single bird landed on the railing, shook itself dry, then flew off again. Daniel poured another cup of coffee. Sat across from her. I was thinking of mowing the back today, he said, voice low. Clara didn't lift her head. You said that yesterday. I know. You didn't. I know. She finally looked up. Her face wasn't upset, just aware. That strange, grown kind of awareness some kids were like hand-me-downs. You don't have to if you don't want to, she said. I might want to, then do it. He noticed her fingers linger on the binding, like she wanted to draw, but didn't have a shape in her head yet. Instead, she stood and rinsed her plate without being asked. Wiped the counter with the edge of her sleeve. Can I go sit out front? She asked. Coat, he reminded her. She nodded, already grabbing the one with the loose zipper. The screen door clicked behind her. He listened to her footsteps across the porch, then the slow squeak of the swing. Not a loud sound, more like an old breath, exhaled over and over. Daniel stayed in the kitchen, washed the butter knife, let the hot water run too long, watched it swirl into the drain with a kind of focus that made no sense. Then he walked to the hall closet, pulled out the mower gas can, checked its weight, still half full. Outside, the grass was damp, but not soggy. He could work with it. He passed Clara without speaking. The wet scent of crushed green filled the air. Daniel pushed in slow lines. Back and forth. The yard was uneven. Little divots made the mower jolt. But he didn't mind. It gave his hands something to adjust to. A rhythm. A resistance. He glanced at the porch once. Clara's still there, legs tucked under her, drawing. Maybe the sky would clear by afternoon. Maybe not. But the grass would be shorter. And, somehow, that felt like something. Daniel cleared his throat. I was thinking of fixing the fence today. Clara didn't respond. After she left for school, Daniel went upstairs, opened the guest closet, looking for the old toolbox. What he found instead was a box of Marie's things, left behind years ago, or maybe just never claimed. He sat on the floor and opened it. A scarf, a paperback novel with her name in the corner, a photo tucked between the pages. Clara as a baby, sleeping on Marie's chest. Both looked exhausted. Content. Daniel stared at it for a long while. He hadn't seen Marie in 3 months. Not since the day she signed the papers with a lawyer present. Not since she said, "It's better this way," without meeting his eyes. He believed her, but that didn't make it easier. He placed the photo on the nightstand, not out of nostalgia, just to remember, to anchor something. The sky turned gray by noon. Light drizzle came and went. Daniel spent an hour replacing the broken latch on the side gate. He didn't rush. The wood was soft with rot, and the nails slipped too easily. When he was done, the fence still leaned, but less than before. That was something. That evening, Clara came home with wet cuffs and paint on her hands. We did posters, she said, holding up a smeared sheet. The letters were too big for the paper. He nodded. Looks great. She shrugged. I didn't want to do it, she added. But the teacher said I had to. Daniel smiled just a little. Sometimes we do things we don't want to. Yeah, she said and walked past him. At dinner, June made meatloaf. The same recipe from Daniel's childhood. Overcooked edges. June asked if she needed help with math. Clara said no. Afterward, Daniel washed the dishes. The water ran hot and steady. When he turned around, Clara was standing by the fridge, holding the photo he'd left out. This was in her book, he said. Clara looked at it without blinking. She used to sing to me, she said. I don't remember the words, just that it was soft. Daniel nodded. I think she loved you, he said quietly. Clara shrugged. I don't know if that matters now. He didn't correct her, because maybe she was right. She placed the photo back on the table, face down. Can I go read? He nodded. She walked away. Later that night, as he passed her room, he heard her humming. Soft, aimless, almost like a memory trying to remember itself. Daniel paused in the hallway, leaned against the wall, eyes closed. Then he walked on. No one had come to make amends. No one had called to explain. But somehow, the silence had changed shape. No longer heavy, just present, like fog lifting after rain, like the absence of thunder. The move wasn't sudden. It had been coming in small gestures. June asking if they'd thought about the coast, Clara drawing more sunrises than storm clouds. Daniel checking listings on a library computer he barely knew how to use. They didn't talk about it. They just packed. 1 box a day. Daniel labeled them in thick marker. Books, clothes, kitchen some. Clara packed her sketch pads last. She flipped through every page, tearing out one she didn't like, folding it in half, and throwing it away without expression. June offered to help, but Daniel shook his head. She's got her own rhythm, he said. He meant Clara, but it was true of all of them. Each item folded and tucked away wasn't just a belonging, it was a choice. What to carry, what to leave, what could survive the next chapter, and what belonged to the one now ending. The final night in June's house, Clara stood on the porch barefoot, arms crossed over her chest. Will it be colder there? She asked. Daniel stepped beside her. Maybe. Windier. She nodded like it mattered, like she was planning how to meet it. Inside, June was wrapping the last dish towel in paper, humming something half-remembered. She'd promised to visit. She said she might even like the sea. No one cried. No photos were taken. Just boxes in a truck, rain on the horizon, and the quiet understanding that beginnings don't always look like doors opening. Sometimes they look like doors closing, softly, gently, with care. And a girl climbing into the passenger seat beside her father. But maybe he meant himself, too. On the last night in that house, they ate leftovers, macaroni, and half a rotisserie chicken. The kind of dinner you don't take pictures of. No garnish, no table setting. Just warm food on mismatched plates and a quiet between them that felt like the end of something. Or maybe the soft beginning of something else. June sat with them, one elbow on the table, her hair up in a clip that caught the light every time she moved. She didn't say much. No speeches. No advice. Just the clink of forks and the sound of an old wall clock ticking like it had somewhere to be. The way some silences feel holy, not because of what they say, but because of what they leave untouched. When it was time for bed, Clara hugged her grandmother. Thank you, she said. For what? June asked, brushing a crumb from Clara's sleeve. For not asking too many things. June smiled, soft and full of something older than words. That's what age teaches you, sweetheart. To leave some things alone. Clara nodded. The way children do when they understand more than they can explain. The next morning, Daniel woke before the sun, as he often did in those days. He didn't turn on any lights. Just moved through the house like a memory, packing the last few things into the car while the air still smelled like dew and dish soap. The boxes fit just barely, like they'd rehearsed it. A lumpy quilt sat on top, and Clara's sketchbook rested in the glove compartment, safe from the weight of the other things. Daniel had labeled everything in thick, black letters: books, tools, clothes, kitchen some, but not the last box, the one filled with drawings and the letters still unsent. Clara came out wearing the yellow raincoat Marie once bought her. Too small in the sleeves now. Zipper sticky, but she wore it anyway. She held a thermos of cocoa, knees drawn up in the front seat like she wasn't quite sure how to sit in this new chapter. June stepped out in a robe, carrying a paper bag. Sandwiches, she said, handing it to Daniel. And one cookie. He took it with a quiet nod, looked her in the eyes, just for a second, and that was enough. I'll call, he said. You better. Clara waved once. A small bird-like motion. Then Daniel turned the key. The engine stuttered, coughed, then caught. The driveway was wet from the night's mist, and as they backed away, the house didn't wave. But the porch light flickered once before going out. They drove slow, windows half-fogged, windshield wipers squeaking against a dry smear. Neither of them spoke until the highway appeared. What's it like there? Clara asked. Daniel hesitated. Haven't been in years, he said. I remember wind. And sand that gets in everything. Do they have a library? Most places do. She looked out the window again, pressing her palm lightly against the glass, as if trying to feel the sky through it. As they passed the edge of town, the school came into view. The flag still hung on the pole, limp in the still morning air. No cars, no sounds, just the hush that follows when something once important has been left behind. Clara didn't say goodbye. Daniel didn't either. There was nothing left to say to sidewalks and parking lots. The car radio was broken, so they rode in silence. No music, no news, just the hum of tires and the occasional wind dragging itself across the hood. Clara fell asleep somewhere around mile 62, head against the window, lips slightly parted. Her fingers curled around the handle of her thermos, like she was afraid it might disappear. Daniel checked the mirror every 10 minutes. Not for danger, but to make sure she was still breathing. Still there. At a rest stop, he bought 2 sodas and a plastic flower for the dashboard. Why? She asked when she woke. He shrugged. Felt right. She nodded, and they kept going. Around midday, they passed a road sign that said, Haven Cove, 17 miles. Daniel didn't tell her that was the place. He wanted it to feel like discovery, something they both arrive at together. The coast appeared in pieces, salt in the air, gulls floating like crumpled paper, then a stretch of ocean that looked more like memory than water. The sky opened above it like a breath held too long. Clara leaned forward. "Is that it?" He nodded. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. "Looks big," she said. "It is. Are we staying long?" He glanced at her, then back at the road. "As long as we need." The house sat on a slow bend in the road, tucked behind dune grass and a rusted mailbox that leaned like it had grown tired of holding names. Its paint was peeling. One shutter hung sideways. But the porch stood solid, and the window facing the ocean was open just enough to let the air in. Daniel parked at the bottom of the gravel path, engine humming a little longer than necessary before he turned the key. Clara stared up at the house. "It's smaller than I thought." He looked at it too. "Me too. Still, there was something promising in its shape. A porch with room for 2 chairs, a clothesline half sagging in the wind, and 3 windows facing the road, one with a curtain drawn half open. Like the house had been watching them come. He didn't say it aloud, but in that moment he hoped, not for a new beginning, just a quiet place to rest. The store was small, lit with yellow bulbs that buzzed overhead like insects. The produce sat under dim mist sprays, giving the lettuce a kind of dignity. There were only 3 aisles, and every week they walked them slow, Daniel with a list folded in his palm, Clara trailing, occasionally grabbing something not written down. She liked the corner near the back, where the freezer hummed, and condensation ran like veins down the glass. There was a rack of used paperbacks near the register. Romance novels, mostly. Their spines bent like they'd been read too quickly. Clara flipped through them sometimes, not to read, just to touch the pages, like she was checking for a heartbeat. Daniel paid in cash. Always cash. He didn't like the sound the car machine made, or maybe he didn't like how fast everything became when people paid with a beep. Cash slowed things down, the way he liked it now. After shopping, they drove the long road home, the sea always just behind the dunes. Clara sometimes asked to stop, and they would. She'd walk ahead, sneakers half filled with sand. Kneel to draw circles with a stick she found. Not pictures, just circles, one inside another, like a tide, trying to explain itself. Daniel waited. He never told her when it was time to go. She always came back on her own. The fridge back home was old, but reliable. It hummed like the one in June's kitchen, and sometimes that hum made Daniel stop and listen, just to remind himself where he was. Clara took to reading in the bathtub, not bathing, just reading. She said it was quieter in there. The walls held sound better. She'd bring a pillow and 2 books, sometimes 3. When Daniel knocked, she always answered, still alive. Nights came early by the coast. Shadows stretched across the living room before 6. They didn't always turn the lights on. Sometimes it was enough to sit in that blue-gray dusk, sipping tea, listening to the wind wrestle the siding. Daniel didn't have many words left at the end of the day. Clara didn't need them. She'd sketch in her lap, loose lines and soft smudges. Not people, not houses, mostly the sky, not as it was, but as it might be if someone had forgotten to finish it. One evening, he found her asleep on the floor, her hand still holding the pencil, the page half filled, a single curl of graphite across her cheek like a mark she'd earned in sleep. He covered her with a light blanket they kept on the couch, turned the kettle off before it whistled. The next morning, she asked if she could paint the back porch. "Why?" he asked. "It looks like it's waiting." "For what?" "I don't know. A color." He bought the paint 2 towns over. Blue. Not ocean blue, but something between cornflower and the sky before sunrise. Clara picked it. She said it looked like a secret no one had told yet. They painted slowly. She did most of the edges, her tongue pressed to her lip in concentration. Daniel did the rails. The old wood soaked it up like memory. When they were done, Clara stepped back. "It looks like someone lives here now." Daniel nodded. "We do." She didn't say anything more. But later, he found one of her sketches taped to the fridge, a drawing of the porch, fresh painted, with 2 cups on the railing and a cat that didn't exist sitting at the step. He didn't take it down. The days folded into one another like laundry. There were phone calls sometimes, June checking in, a message from the school asking about enrollment. Marie didn't call. Clara never asked. One morning, Daniel caught her standing in the hallway, holding the letter, the one she'd written months ago. She didn't say anything. He didn't ask. She tore it in half, then in half again, and threw it into the bin. "I feel better," she said. He believed her. That night, the wind picked up. Not a storm, just enough to make the porch boards groan and the windows sigh. Daniel stood outside, hands in pockets, watching the dark. Behind him, Clara played a record they'd found in the attic. Some old folk song that crackled more than it sang. But it was music, and for now it was enough. They didn't laugh much, but some evenings a smile would pass between them, quick, fragile, the kind that doesn't ask to stay. Like when Clara burned her toast and tried to blame the toaster for having a mean setting, or when Daniel accidentally knocked over a vase no one liked anyway. They weren't trying to be happy, just trying not to be heavy all the time. That, in itself, was a kind of peace. Daniel spent a few afternoons fixing the back steps. The wood had warped, pulling away from the nails. He worked slowly, not because it was hard, but because it gave his hands something honest to do. Clara sat nearby, sometimes reading, sometimes just watching the sea blink behind him. "You could have been a carpenter," she said once. Daniel didn't answer right away, just kept hammering until the board stayed put. "I wasn't good at measuring," he said finally. Clara didn't press. She rarely did. She was learning how to sit with things. Some mornings, Daniel would wake before the light and walk down to the shoreline. The beach was always different. Rocks shifted. Seaweed gathered. Sometimes a dead crab curled in the sand like a question. He never took anything back. Just his breath, a little deeper each time. Clara took to sketching in silence. Not just people or clouds now, but textures, wood grain, the curl of a wave, the way wet leaves stuck to pavement. She drew them close up, as if trying to understand things from the inside out. Behind his expired driver's license. When he cleaned out the old shed by the garden, he found a broken kite, half a rake, and a coffee tin full of mismatched buttons. He almost threw them away. But then Clara poked her head in. "Can I have the buttons?" "Why? I don't know yet." That was enough. She strung them onto a thread that night and wore them like a bracelet. "It sounds old," Clara said. "It is. You think it remembers things?" Daniel sipped slowly. "Maybe." He didn't tell her he often spoke to the house when she wasn't around. Just small things, hold up a bit longer, or don't let the roof leak today. Not prayers, just acknowledgments, like the house had agreed to shelter them, but only if they respected its age. They still hadn't unpacked everything. The boxes had grown familiar now, part of the furniture. Daniel sometimes sat on one while tying his boots. Clara had drawn a smiley face on another. In her room, she'd opened only half of them, keeping the rest sealed, stacked in a corner like secrets she wasn't ready to unwrap. At night, the silence stretched comfortably. No one filled it. They didn't need to. Sometimes, Clara read aloud, not to share, but just to hear words in the room. One evening, she read a line and paused. "You can never have too much sky," she said. Maybe too much sky was just enough for people still figuring out how to live with the weight of land. The sea murmured below like a dog half asleep. Inside, Clara's lamp cast a golden square on the floor. The house creaked once, then stilled, and Daniel stayed there, watching the dark, as if it might turn into morning just by being seen. Sometimes that's how it works. No permission, no plan. Just presence. The dog stayed like a song you didn't know you'd been humming. Quiet, near, constant. He never barked unless the wind pushed too hard against the screen door. Even then, it was more of a soft cough than alarm. A courtesy, really. He followed Clara around the yard like a second shadow. She began talking to him, not in baby talk, but in half-formed thoughts and sentence fragments, like she found a listener who didn't expect conclusions. Daniel noticed. Clara tilted her head. "What if I need him to have one?" Daniel met her eyes then, noticed how much older they looked in a shade. "Then you'll know what it is when it shows up." She didn't argue. That night, she drew a picture of the dog curled into the corner of the blanket, his legs tucked, ears soft. She wrote nothing beneath it, but in the corner, barely legible, were the letters. Maybe. Daniel didn't ask. The house had settled around the dog's presence, like it had been holding space for something unnamed. When Daniel made coffee, he poured a small splash into a dish the dog never touched. When Clara read on the floor, the dog curled near her knee, but never closer, like he understood about boundaries. On Thursday, they walked the beach together, Daniel, Clara, and the dog. The tide was low, seaweed curling like forgotten ribbons in the surf. Clara tossed a piece of driftwood. The dog ran after it, then didn't bring it back. Just lay beside it in the sand, watching the sea. Clara didn't mind. "That's okay," she said. "He's just keeping it company." Daniel watched her face when she said it. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't sad either. That evening, They had grilled cheese and tomato soup. The dog sat by the door, tail thumping every time Clara made noise. She fed him the crusts. One by one, they watched a storm come in from the west. The sea turned black at the edges, and the clouds rolled like slow thunder. Clara didn't flinch. Neither did the dog. Daniel stood in the doorway and watched them, her hand resting lightly on the dog's back, the kind of contact that didn't ask for anything in return. The storm passed with little drama. Just a flicker of wind and some sideways rain. But afterward, everything smelled like salt and forgiveness. Later that night, Daniel found a small pile of buttons outside his door, ones Clara had used from her bracelet, arranged in a half circle like an offering, or a message. He didn't move them. In the morning, they were gone. Maybe the dog had nudged them away. Maybe Clara had. Maybe the wind had its own ideas. On Sunday, Daniel built a small ramp for the dog, his back legs still weak. The porch steps too steep. He didn't say it was for the dog. He just left it there. Clara noticed, ran her hand down the grain of the wood, didn't speak. That night, when Daniel passed her room, he saw the dog curled at the foot of her bed, the girl asleep, the creature near. The window opened just enough to hear the sea whispering about permanence and grace. Daniel stood there for a while, holding nothing, just listening, just breathing. And outside, the wind carried no names, only the shape of belonging. Daniel made eggs most days. He'd learned how she liked them, not because she told him, but because he watched. Firm yolks, toast not too crisp, butter only on one side. Coffee with 2 teaspoons of creamer, stirred clockwise. When he got it wrong, she didn't complain. She just moved her fork slower. When he got it right, she didn't say thank you. She just ate a little quicker. The dog would sit nearby, front paws crossed, waiting for the piece of toast Clara always saved for him. She tore it in half, left one piece on the floor, the other in her hand. Sometimes he chose the one from her hand. Sometimes he didn't. That was his rhythm. After breakfast, they'd go about their day. No schedules. No la declarations. Daniel fixed small things around the house. Drawers that stuck, hinges that groaned, a porch step that creaked too sharply. Clara read in patches of sun, sometimes on the couch, sometimes on the floor, sometimes outside, her back against the house, knees drawn up, a pencil between her fingers she didn't always use. The dog stayed close, always a few feet away, but never underfoot. He moved with the kind of patience Daniel envied. No urgency, just presence. The kind of presence you don't earn overnight. Some days Clara walked the beach alone. Not far, not fast. She'd come back with her pockets full of things. Shells with holes, flat stones, broken feathers. She left most of it by the windowsill or on the kitchen counter. Daniel never threw them away. One afternoon, she handed him a smooth piece of driftwood. For what? He asked. She shrugged. You'll figure it out. He didn't, but he kept it on his nightstand. Nights were quiet in a different way. Not the silence of absence, but the hush of something healing. They didn't always eat together, but when they did, it was simple. Soup and crackers, baked potatoes, tuna on toast, sometimes just cereal. Clara lit a candle once, for no reason. Daniel didn't ask why. He just let it burn. They rarely watched TV. The screen felt too loud, too false. Instead, Daniel listened to the old radio in the kitchen. Jazz mostly. Sometimes weather reports from places they'd never been. Clara would draw, her face in half shadow, and the dog would rest his chin on her foot. When the music got slow, Daniel tapped his finger against the table in rhythm. Once, Clara joined him, drumming her spoon lightly on the rim of her bowl. They didn't look at each other, but the sound stayed for a while. On Saturdays, Daniel drove into town for groceries. Clara came sometimes. Not always. When she stayed, the dog stayed too. Daniel didn't mind. The grocery store was run by a woman named Sharon. She never asked too many questions. Just rang things up and offered double paper bags when the handles looked thin. Daniel appreciated that. One Saturday, he bought a small carton of strawberries. Out of season. Too expensive. But Clara had glanced at them once, and he remembered. Back home, he left them on the counter without saying anything. She saw them, said nothing. But that evening, it wasn't from anyone Daniel recognized. Just a picture of a lighthouse and a few lines scribbled on the back. It's not where you end up. It's where you stop running. No signature. Clara found it first. Are you going to keep it? She asked. Daniel looked at it a long time, then pinned it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a fish. Yeah, he said. I think I will. I think I like it here, she said, voice barely above the breeze. Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at the waves, the moonlight on the water, the way her shoulders rested lower than before. I do too, he said finally. The dog lifted his head, then rested it again. None of them moved for a long while. The tide came in. The stars blinked without urgency. And the silence wasn't lonely. Not anymore. She never thanked him, but she ate every bite. That, too, became a language. One afternoon, he caught her standing barefoot on the porch, staring out at the trees, sketchbook held loosely in her hand. Not drawing, just holding. The dog sat beside her, ears tilted, as if he too were waiting for something to move. Daniel fixed a step on the porch that day, not because it needed fixing badly, but because it was something to do with his hands. Clara watched in silence, then went inside and came back with a lemonade. She set it beside him, said nothing, and sat 2 steps down with her back against the post. For a while, the only sound was the steady rhythm of the screwdriver. Then she spoke. You know that bench on the pier? He nodded, though he wasn't sure. It used to say come back soon. Someone carved it in. But now it says, come back when you're ready. Someone scratched out soon. Daniel didn't look up. He just tightened another screw. That's better, she said softly. That night, they made grilled cheese together. She burned hers. He traded without a word. She noticed but didn't make a fuss. And something loosened in her shoulders, subtle, but there, in that house. Small things began to anchor them. A peace lily on the kitchen table. A receipt for Marie tucked in a drawer. The dogs snored drifting from the hallway. One morning, Daniel watched Clara slice an apple, arrange the pieces in a fan on his plate. No words. But that was the thing about living with grief. You learn to speak in gestures. He brought home a faded red thermos from the thrift store and left it on the counter. The next day, she used it to carry tea to the beach. Some evenings, he sat on the porch and watched her down by the shoreline, walking slow, the dog at her side, a tennis ball in her hand she never threw, just held. Maybe some part of her was learning that not every story needed a climax. Some just needed presence. The world outside their bubble kept turning, sirens in the distance. Letters in the mail Daniel never opened. Neighbors mowing lawns with loud engines and louder music. But inside the house, life began to pulse gently. There were still ghosts. He found an old lipstick in the bathroom cabinet once. Coral pink, Marie's favorite. He held it like it might dissolve, then put it back exactly where it was. Clara sometimes paused in front of the mirror too long, as if expecting someone else to appear. They didn't talk about those things. Not because they couldn't, but because silence had earned its place between them. Healing didn't shout. It repeated, feeding the same dog, making the same breakfast, letting your daughter call you dad without flinching. And then, one night, as they sat at the table with mismatched plates and leftover soup, Clara looked up. Dad! Daniel didn't answer with words, just looked at her full on. I want to take an art class. He nodded. There's one at the rec center. Starts next week. You should do it, he said, his voice low. Clara looked down, then up again. I think I'm ready. And maybe that was it. Not a resolution, not a revelation, just a girl with a pencil and a man who'd learned to listen, sharing soup and silence and something like peace. Morning unfurled slowly across the house. There was no dramatic sunrise, just a subtle lightening, as if the darkness had grown tired and backed away inch by inch. Through the thin curtains, a soft gold washed over the kitchen tiles, the worn table, the chipped mug that Daniel always reached for first. He stood barefoot, rubbing the back of his neck, letting the steam from the coffee drift up into his face like a kind of benediction. Murphy was already awake. The dog nosed open Clara's door, gave a low huff, and padded out to sit by the sliding glass door, watching the dew bead and fall from the tall grass beyond the porch. Daniel's breath misted faintly on the window. It was cooler today, the first whisper that autumn might be on its way. He heard Clara's door click softly shut. Her footsteps were lighter than they used to be. Or maybe he was just hearing differently now. She entered the kitchen in her usual silence. Oversized hoodie, hair a little wild, her sketchbook tucked close like something fragile. She didn't say good morning. She didn't have to. Daniel slid the second mug toward her. She took it, sat across from him, and opened her book, not to draw, but just to be near it, to be near him. These mornings had become their ritual. Unwritten, undiscussed, but sacred. She traced the edge of one unfinished page with her finger, then closed it. Want to drive out to the pier today? Daniel asked, finally breaking the quiet. Clara nodded. That was all. They packed light. Thermos, a blanket, her pencils, the old paper bag Daniel carried, but rarely read anymore. Murphy jumped into the truck bed, like he understood the plan. The drive was quiet. Fields slipped by, fences sagging in places, mailboxes leaning, the occasional tractor left rusting by the edge of a barn. Life still happening, just slower now. The pier wasn't crowded. It rarely was. A few locals fished off the far end, their lines cutting small arcs through the air. Clara went to the bench, the one she'd told him about. The words were still carved into the wood. Come back when you're ready. Someone had etched a small heart beside it since she'd last been there. She sat down, opened her sketchbook, and began to draw. Her pencil moved in slow, thoughtful strokes. Daniel didn't sit yet. He stood at the railing, staring out at the water. The tide was low. A gull hovered in place for a second, then dipped and vanished behind the dunes. Where he did sit, it was beside her, a full arm's length apart, close enough to feel the weight of each other's presence. He flipped open the paperback, eyes skimming without really reading. After a while, Clara leaned against him. Just a little. He didn't move. Just let her be there. Later, back at the house, a letter waited on the table. Clara opened it by the sink. Her eyes moved quickly, then slowly, then stopped. They picked my drawing, she said, almost under her breath. Daniel looked up. For what? The fall exhibit. Community center. They want to hang it. He smiled. One of those real ones that start slow and settle deep. That's good, he said. She folded the letter, then reopened it. I don't know if I want to go. You don't have to, Daniel replied. She folded it again. Tighter this time. I think I might, she said. That night, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room. Still his, though it felt less temporary now. He held a photo in his hands. Marie, barefoot in the garden, holding a laughing toddler version of Clara. He traced the edge of the frame with his thumb. We're okay, he said into the stillness. He wasn't sure who needed to hear it more, Marie, himself, or the quiet house. Out on the porch, Clara was waiting. She brought 2 mugs of cocoa this time, one with too many marshmallows, the other without. Murphy lay curled between the chairs, his breathing slow, ears twitching now and then at invisible things. They rocked in the swing as the last of the light bled out behind the hills. A plane blinked across the sky in the distance. Daniel sipped the cocoa, felt the warmth settle in his chest. You know, Claire said after a long time, I think we're going to be all right. He looked at her. Yeah. She nodded. Then, softer, not all at once, but a little at a time. Daniel leaned back, let the swing creak them forward, then back again. Peace, he thought, wasn't a destination. It was this. The porch, the girl, the dog, the silence that didn't ache anymore. A stillness you didn't want to disturb. They stayed like that long after the cups had gone cold. No need to fill the space. The night could speak for itself now. And sometimes, peace sounded just like that. One quiet afternoon, Daniel sat on the back steps with the old dog beside him. The wind came in from the sea, soft with salt and memory. Inside the house, Clara laughed, just once low and brief, at something she'd drawn. A sound so rare it felt like birdsong in winter. He didn't move, just rested his hand on the dog's back and listened. No one ever came to say they were sorry. No phone rang to explain what had been left behind. But somehow the weight had shifted. The house, once a place they merely arrived at, had become a place they chose to stay. Not because they had all the answers, but because they kept showing up for each other anyway. Clara still had quiet days. Daniel still woke with old aches. The dog still limped when the weather turned. But the silence now was different. It wasn't the kind that held grief. It was the kind that made space for breath, for pause, for the slow work of healing. And in that space, things grew. Not loudly, not perfectly, just enough. If you've ever loved someone through the silence, if you've ever sat beside someone, not needing to speak, but needing them there, if you believe that sometimes just staying is the bravest thing we can do, leave a small note below. A dot, a line, a word, not to finish anything, just so someone out there knows they're not the only one still trying.